On September 8, 2025, workers at a tow yard in Hollywood called police about a smell coming from an impounded Tesla. What they found inside would connect a chart-topping singer to the death of a 14-year-old girl, and it would take more than a year, a grand jury, and one cooperating witness before the world found out what investigators believe really happened. I invite you to stay until the end of this video, because the timeline in this case is stranger than almost anything we have covered on this channel. This is Beyond the Evidence, True Crime. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we cover cases like this one every single week. And if you already know this story is going to shock you, drop a like right now before we even get started. The victim's name was Celeste Abigail Rivas Hernandez. She was born September 7, 2010, and grew up in Lake Elsinore, California, part of the Inland Empire east of Los Angeles. Her family has been identified in reporting simply as the Rivas Hernandez family. Celeste was reported missing in April of 2024, when she was 13 years old. For more than a year, nobody outside her family and a small circle of investigators knew what had happened to her. Then came the evidence. On September 5, 2025, a black Tesla Model X was towed from a street in the Hollywood Hills and taken to an impound lot. 3 days later, workers noticed a smell they couldn't ignore. When police opened the front storage compartment, what Tesla owners call the frunk, they found 2 separate bags. According to unsealed court filings, one bag contained a decomposed head and torso. The other contained the girl's arms and legs. The car was registered to a 20-year-old singer known by his stage name, D4vd. His legal name is David Anthony Burke.
Today, I am announcing the charges against David Anthony Burke in connection with the brutal and horrific murder of Celeste, a 14-year-old at that time. And there are 3 sets of charges that have been brought. The first-degree murder with special circumstances, and again, those special circumstances are lying in wait. That Celeste went to Mr. Burke's home on the night of April 23, 2025, as alleged in the complaint, at his invitation, and again, was not heard from again. The second is a special circumstance being that this murder was committed for financial gain. As the evidence will show in court, the financial gain was for Mr. Burke to maintain his very lucrative musical career that Celeste was threatening on that particular night. The third charge, in addition to lying in wait and for financial gain, is murdering a witness to an investigation. In this particular case, as the evidence will come out in court, the witness to the investigation was Celeste. And the investigation was into the lewd and lascivious sexual acts committed by Mr. Burke that is the subject of count 2 of this complaint with Celeste while she was under 14 years.
If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment below with the words, "I'm still here." I want to see how many of you are following this case as closely as we are, because it only gets more complicated from here. At first, all anyone knew was that a body had been found in a car linked to a rising music star. Burke had built a career on emotional, confessional songwriting. His biggest hit, a song called Romantic Homicide, included the line about killing someone in the back of my mind. In earlier interviews, Burke had described those lyrics as figurative, not literal. But once his name became attached to a real death, old lyrics, old posts, and old live streams were suddenly being re-examined by millions of strangers online. Investigators, meanwhile, were doing something slower and far less dramatic, building a timeline. On September 17, 2025, just 9 days after the discovery, LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division served a search warrant on a rental home in the Hollywood Hills, a property Burke had reportedly been leasing for around $20,000 a month. Detectives seized several bags of evidence, including electronics. 2 days later, Burke canceled the remainder of his world tour. His label paused all promotion of his music. A collaboration with a major retail brand quietly disappeared from marketing campaigns. By the end of that month, movers were seen clearing out the rental home entirely. But detectives had overlooked one tiny detail, or rather, they hadn't overlooked it. They just hadn't told the public yet.
Calling People versus David Anthony Burke. Good afternoon, Mr. Burke.
Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman to the people, Your Honor.
Thank you. You're requesting a preliminary hearing within the period?
Yes, Your Honor. From the media reports, apparently there have been 4 months of secret grand jury proceedings. We believe that Mr. Burke is entitled at the earliest opportunity to an open preliminary hearing and the proceedings not be done in secret. So we are asking for a preliminary hearing to be set at the earliest possible date on the 10th day. We believe the actual evidence will show David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez, nor was he the cause of her death. And we would like to be able to have the evidence come into the light of day at the earliest opportunity in order to establish that. We're asking for April 23rd as a 3 of 10, Your Honor.
We'll be very happy to put on the evidence that we've collected in this case in the last several months.
Plea of not guilty has been entered on behalf of Mr. Burke. The matter is ordered assigned to Judge Charlene Almeida.
Yes, Your Honor. If I may just put on the record, we have, as soon as the people arrived, delivered a informal discovery request consistent with Penal Code Section 1054. We have been given almost no discovery thus far. We've received a 3-page follow-up report, no autopsy report, and a copy of the complaint. And we would ask the people respectfully to produce discovery at the earliest opportunity.
According to court documents that would only become public by accident months later, investigators believe Celeste had died in April of 2025, 5 months before her body was ever discovered. That meant that during the entire time Burke was completing an album, doing interviews, and preparing for a world tour, prosecutors allege he already knew what was inside that car. This is where the story changes. In February of 2026, sealed court records connected to an unrelated legal matter in Texas were accidentally made public. Buried inside them was a description of a grand jury investigation that had been running quietly for months. Burke was named as the central target. The filings alleged a detailed and disturbing timeline. That Celeste was killed on or around April 23, 2025. That a shovel was ordered the following day. That Burke's debut album was released to the public that same week. That within the following 2 weeks, someone using an alias allegedly purchased chainsaws, a body bag, and an inflatable pool, and that a burn cage was ordered months later, in July. None of this had been confirmed publicly before, and even with it now on the record, Burke had still not been arrested. Being named a target of a grand jury is not the same as being charged. It means prosecutors believe they have built a case, not that a judge or jury has weighed in. That distinction mattered enormously here, because for months, that was exactly where the case sat, a mountain of alleged evidence and no arrest. So what changed?
My name is Nathan Hockman. I'm the Los Angeles County District Attorney. Today starts the day of the preliminary hearing of David Anthony Burke, the singer David, spelled D4vd. This preliminary hearing will last approximately 3 to 5 days, at which point we will be seeking to hold David to answer for 3 felony counts of which he has been charged. First-degree murder with special circumstances, the count of lewd and lascivious acts with a 13-year-old, and the count of mutilation of human remains. David will be facing a maximum punishment of life without the possibility of parole, or he is also death penalty eligible. The decision on whether or not to seek the death penalty has not been made at this point. The point of a preliminary hearing is somewhat different than you actually perceive in the media, whether it's TV or the movies. Because what often happens in TV or the movies is you go from an immediate arrest into a trial. But in our system and in California in particular, you have an intermediate step. That intermediate step is a preliminary hearing where effectively the prosecution's evidence is going to be tested before a judge, not a jury. The standard that we have to meet is not beyond a reasonable doubt at the preliminary hearing stage. It is probable cause. We are not obligated, nor will we be presenting all the evidence at a preliminary hearing that we will be presenting at a trial to prove David beyond a reasonable doubt guilty of the 3 felony charges of which he has been charged. So at the preliminary hearing, we will call a number of officers. We estimate there will be over 10 different witnesses, both officer testimony, coroner testimony, and there will be individual witnesses as well. And again, we can rely on hearsay and other things that won't be allowed to be relied on in an actual trial. The judge at the end of the presentation of the evidence, and again, this is evidence that can be cross-examined by a defense attorney, and that process has already been done. At the end of the presentation of all this evidence, the question will be, will David be held to answer on the 3 felony charges? We believe we will more than accomplish the evidentiary burden of probable cause at this point to hold David to answer on these 3 felony charges. At that point, if the judge does hold him to answer, we will file an information that will detail the actual 3 criminal charges. Thereafter, there will be a trial date that will be set, and David, if he so chooses, will proceed to trial. And we will prove at that point, beyond a reasonable doubt, that David committed these 3 crimes. And we do not predict if, when he is convicted, we will then be seeking the sentence that we are allowed to seek by order of law, and we will let you know in a future date whether or not that sentence will also include the death penalty. So I wanted to take this opportunity as we're starting this preliminary hearing process to explain where the preliminary hearing fits in the process so people can understand as we are presenting evidence and it is being cross-examined what ultimately the standard is for the judge to determine, and that's probable cause, not beyond a reasonable doubt. It is a judge that is doing this determination, not a jury at this point, and that there will subsequently be a trial when the judge holds David to answer on these 3 felony charges.
A witness did. 23-year-old Ennio Langston, a streamer and former close friend of Burke's, had reportedly avoided testifying for months. In late January of 2026, he was arrested in Montana for failing to appear before the grand jury. He was extradited to Los Angeles, and in early February, he gave roughly 40 minutes of testimony behind closed doors. Legal analysts described his cooperation as devastating for the defense. Langston had reportedly been close to Burke both before Celeste's death and after her remains were discovered, meaning he was in a position to know things almost no one else did.
That testimony in court, it was honestly just sickening to see the footage of what was found in that car, to hear the testimony of the officer that actually dealt with that. It was just honestly just horrifying. That was extremely bad, and really that was kind of very, very damning. There wasn't really much to defend on that front, but what they did manage to do was the defense pointed out some very, very interesting holes in that basically timeline of when the body was discovered and recovered. They basically pointed out some inconsistencies with the fact that it was kind of a local police department that opened the Tesla, exposed the first bag. It was then the detectives from the robbery homicide division that then came and moved the first bag, discovered the second bag underneath it in the Tesla, and then it was the medical examiner that then came to the scene and was the only person authorized to touch the body. Now, one point that they made that was very, very interesting was they basically said, why didn't you keep the body bag? They never kept the body bag that Celeste was unfortunately found in. They basically disposed of it, and they disposed of, and it's disgusting to say, I'm so sorry to say this, but the liquefied remains that were inside that bag, they basically said we didn't really have the means to preserve that. That was unpreservable. What we did is we cut the handles off the body bag that might have had DNA on it, and we kept obviously the core remains, but they basically admit we don't have the body bag. I don't know where it is. They sort of said, oh, was it destroyed? And they said, oh, we wouldn't say destroyed, but it was not, we couldn't preserve it. It was just liquefied remains in a bag, in a mesh bag that was just, half a leftover garbage bag. It was not preservable. Now that unfortunately did look quite bad on the prosecution to sort of say, well, this is a really, really important thing. Why didn't you preserve it? And them arguing, well, we couldn't preserve it. It wasn't preservable. Didn't really kind of land for some people. I feel like for a lot of people it felt like that really wasn't a good enough answer, and it sort of made you think, okay, there's some inconsistencies here. And I'll be honest with you, I think the prosecution had a pretty hard time when they started talking about all the evidence that was claimed from David's property. Now, there was some pretty bad timeline stuff. We've heard all these rumors of David had a chainsaw, he had multiple chainsaws in his property, but it turns out there were actually 3 chainsaws. There were 2 chainsaws that were ordered off Amazon that were found in his property, and neither of those had any DNA on it. Apparently neither of those had blood on them, neither of those actually had any of his DNA or his evidence on them, and the cops ended up leaving them there. They talked about the burn cage, which wasn't used. They talked about not being able to find an apparent, heat-proof mat that was ordered on Amazon, and really alleged chainsaw that this dismemberment was allegedly carried out with apparently was never found, and it sounds like that was something that was Uber Eats or Postmates to him. He'd kind of ordered a shovel, this other chainsaw, and it did make you think, is this the play that he's going for? The actual chainsaw that he used has been vanished, has been disappeared, but the two chainsaws that they found in his property that he ordered off Amazon that didn't have any evidence on them that they were used in a crime. That really throws people off the scent, and it makes you wonder, okay, what do we actually have? They allegedly have the cadaver bags being ordered off Amazon, but they don't have the bags themselves. That evidence they said they wasn't able to preserve, so that doesn't really look too good. I was very surprised that we heard talk of all this searching going on in the property, but we didn't actually get a concrete confirmation. I didn't hear at any point them mention blood being found in the garage, which I thought was something that was going to be brought up. Maybe that's going to be brought up later. They did bring up the blue kiddie pool that was found in the garage, and they said they did recover that, and the plastic pieces were found, it's horrible to say, but lodged in her the severance wounds on her limbs. But there were definitely a few things that just didn't quite add up. The fact that it was to find out these two chainsaws that we've been hearing about for so long hadn't been used in the dismemberment, that was very, very shocking, to be honest with you, and I feel like I was very, very surprised. And it sounds like whatever that chainsaw that was actually used to do this dismemberment is long gone, apparently. They haven't been able to recover that.
Not long after his testimony, Langston broke his public silence. He referred to Celeste publicly as a victim and said the case was about getting justice for her and her family. For a former friend of the accused to say that out loud, on the record, was one of the clearest signals yet of where the case was heading. This is the part most reports leave out. While all of this was happening in Los Angeles, deputies in Cypress, Texas responded twice to a property tied to Burke after security alarms were triggered there. Property records connected the home to a trust bearing a name resembling his debut album. No search warrant was ever executed at that address. To this day, it's unclear whether anyone actually attempted entry or why. If you're finding this case as unsettling as we did researching it, make sure you're subscribed, because we're going to keep covering every court date as this story moves toward trial. On April 17, 2026, more than a year after Celeste's death, and more than 7 months after her remains were found, David Burke was finally arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains, all with special circumstances that make him eligible for life without parole. He has pleaded not guilty to every charge. His attorneys have stated publicly that the evidence will show he did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez and was not the cause of her death. Then came the preliminary hearing.
They were able to do, through a warrant, just extractions from his phone, which apparently was an iPhone 16 Pro, and it was Pro Max, called the Tranquilizer. And this phone, by the way, has never physically been located. And this was the phone disconnected on the 29th. So per Celebrate activity, they were kind of showing us sort of the places that he went, and they were screenshotting some of these places from the infotainment center on the Tesla and matching it up to the iCloud. For example, we had a trip identified in navigation to Santa Barbara and Lake Cachuma, plus a Tesla charge in San Ynez Valley in May of 2025, a month after they believe she was killed. There was another location of interest, a charging station on 729, which is on the way to Santa Barbara as well. And they found surveillance footage from a home nearby when he parked the Tesla on July 29th, 2025, the alleged last time that it was in his possession. And they showed us just multiple angles of him getting out, going into his home, and that's that.
There's approximately 40 terabytes of discovery in this case. Moreover, in order to obtain the transcripts from a grand jury investigation, counsel has to file a motion. She knows the way the system works. I'm not able to gather those. They have to be provided after the court orders them released because it was an investigation. Second of all, if counsel plans on going to a preliminary hearing within the 10 days, it is unlikely that there will be very much discovery provided within that period, given the voluminous nature and how long it's going to take to copy onto drives. In addition to that, the coroner's report was sealed in this case in order to prevent it from hampering truthful testimony from witnesses that testified at the grand jury. So an order will also have to be obtained in order to get the coroner's department, which is now the medical examiner's department, to release those materials.
It's surprising news given that the district attorney's office held a press conference this morning where they discussed the cause of death, apparently under seal and not released by the coroner's office, as did the robbery homicide unit to the press. So we would again reiterate, we believe that Mr. Burke is entitled to discovery. We have served the people with notice. They have 15 days to produce discovery in this case. We would ask that they do that in conscientious earnestness and as quickly as possible.
Bail to stand at no bail. Thank you.
Over 5 days beginning in late April and continuing into a multi-day hearing in July of 2026, prosecutors called a dozen witnesses in an effort to establish probable cause. A criminalist with LAPD's Trace Analysis Unit testified that fragments of blue plastic embedded in Celeste's knee were a physical match to the damaged inflatable pool recovered from the rental home's garage. A pool investigators say showed cuts consistent with a blade, with pieces missing. One piece of physical evidence. One damaged pool. One match that prosecutors argue ties a specific object, in a specific home, to Celeste's body. The courtroom fell silent when that testimony was read into the record.
But like I said, it was still David's defense team's job to poke holes at all the evidence presented. And that's exactly what they tried to do when the robbery homicide detective presented this evidence during the hearing.
Do you think the family is as quiet as they are because they knew who David was and they knew who she was going to, and you don't really see too much of an intervention between them?
I mean, yes, I have proof that family members have been to that rental house before, have been with David and Celeste.
Wait, her family has been to his house?
Family members. Listen, one of the first things I put down in this case was we know that David and Celeste were at Six Flags on a certain date, and we found a Build-A-Bear certificate from the Build-A-Bear place in Six Flags in her cousin's name at the house. You know, and so it's like, wait a minute, so she wasn't really missing. You know what you want to know, in my opinion, what the missing persons report was about? It was to cover their ass so CPS didn't come in and say, hey, she's not going to school. What's up? If she's a missing person, you say she's not going to the school because she's a missing person. You know, then you don't have CPS in your life at that moment. You know. Listen, I sympathize. I know that they're grieving. I know they lost a daughter, but goddamn, like she shouldn't have been allowed to be. She was gone a year and a half, man. A year and a half. Like, somebody should have said, you know, maybe we shouldn't be letting Celeste live her own life like this.
On July 21st, 2026, the judge ruled that the case would proceed to trial. Burke remains held without bail. His post-preliminary arraignment has been scheduled for August 31st, 2026. That means, as of the recording of this video, this case is not over. There has been no conviction. There has been no verdict. What exists right now is a set of serious felony charges, a defendant who denies all of them, and a trial still to come. We want to be very clear with you about that, because it matters. A charge is an accusation. It is the legal system's way of saying there is enough evidence to bring the question before a jury, not a determination of guilt. David Burke is entitled to the same presumption of innocence as anyone else facing trial, no matter how much attention his case has received. What we do know, without dispute, is this. A 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez went missing from her home in Lake Elsinore, California, in April of 2024. She was killed, according to investigators, roughly a year later, in April of 2025. Her remains were not found until September of that year, inside a car registered to a man she reportedly knew. It would take another 7 months after that discovery before anyone was arrested. And as of today, more than a year and 4 months after her body was found, her family is still waiting for a trial to conclude. Before we close this video out, we want to do something we try to do on every case we cover here. Remember that behind the headlines, behind the court documents, behind the online debates about lyrics and live streams, there was a real 13-year-old girl who never made it home, and a family who has now spent more than 2 years without answers. Whatever the jury eventually decides, that loss is already permanent. If you've made it this far, thank you for genuinely sitting with this case instead of just skimming the headlines. It means a lot to us, and it's exactly why this channel exists. Before you go, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We like to give a shout out to a viewer in every video, and today's shout out goes to Ariana George, watching all the way from Texas. We'll leave you with one question. Do you think the year-and-a-half gap between the discovery of Celeste's body and Burke's arrest was appropriate caution by investigators building an airtight case? Or was it too long? Tell us your honest opinion in the comments below. If you want to be notified the moment this case moves toward trial, subscribe now and turn on the bell. We'll see you in the next one.